Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Nick and Joe Show. I'm Nick. He's Joe. He's in Ottawa. I am all the way out on the west coast, uh, out here on the Straits of Juan de Fuca, tied up at a marina here in our latest adventure. We went out and bought a 48-foot cabin cruiser built by a guy called William Garden. And he never did a whole run of boats. Each one was unique. And this one is 48 feet long, and it's really, it has a lot of character. The boat, if people don't know what I'm talking about, just pretend you think about movies like the PT 109 or any motor torpedo boat movie, and take away about 30 knots. And no torpedo tubes and no gun in the boat, forecastle. But I am working on it.
Nick, nobody. I'm just trying to adjust my microphone here because I got a new sort of instead of one of those scissor booms. What I did was I've got a very solid gooseneck.
There you go.
So I could make it into any shape, but it takes two hands and some muscle. Nobody knows those movies. Nobody knows what PT 109 is.
Oh, come
now,
on.
PT 109. Who was the famous guy that commanded PT 109?
That was John F. Kennedy.
John F. Kennedy. Yep.
And it got sank and run over, I believe, and he had to swim to an island with his crew.
It did get sunk, and he did live on a deserted island, but not Gilligan's Island.
No. Gilligan's Island's a whole different show.
It certainly is. So how does it feel to be you're a real lefty now, Nick? You're living out there on the left coast.
Only by geography, certainly not by philosophy. What I do is when I'm walking around, because it's really eclectic in part of the world, you're going to find people of every imaginable political stripe. You've got people who are hardcore conservatives. You've got people who are liberals, NDP, obviously. But then you've got this whole rainbow coalition. I don't mean that in any kind of pejorative way, but you've really got people from every possible political outlook you can imagine somehow gravitate. It's like somebody tilted the country from the right, stuck their hand under the Maritimes, lifted it, and everybody kind of dribbled over to the west. And that's the way it immigrated too. But it's an absolutely stunning place. Every corner you go around is kind of like a postcard. And the more we get to know it, and the more I keep my mouth shut about politics, the better off it is. Because I'll tell you, you can really, you just never know who you're going to run into. And the first job is to get along, right? You don't want to cause a fuss with the neighbors. So you keep your opinions to yourself unless they come up in conversation. And even then, you play nice. You don't, you know how I feel about the prime minister. So I don't go down that rabbit hole very often. And if I do, I don't go very far. So, and there's a lot.
Nick, you've only just arrived.
Yeah, that's also true. But the nice thing is, if I happen to annoy the neighborhood too much, I can just slip and leave. Excuse me. Find another anchorage.
You just pull up anchor and slip out quietly sometime in the
dead of night. That's right.
Find yourself a cove somewhere.
And drop the hook and say, I hope they don't find me here. But one of the things about this boat is a little over 50 years old, and it has its own unique character. And this is part of the discovery process, because we've come out, you don't buy a boat of this caliber and size on Kijiji sight unseen. And that was part of the reason. There was 2 trips that we made on boat hunting expeditions. And that was, we alluded to those a little bit on Facebook and on the show and so on. But it was all to end up where we are now. So when we first set foot on the boat, it was just, we saw it walking down the jetty and just like, oh man, are you serious? And the price was reasonable. So we obviously concluded the transaction, and now the boat is, I own it. And, but when we got here 2 days ago, let's say Sunday, we were here by Friday afternoon, Friday morning, and everything seemed to work just fine. By Saturday, I realized we had a problem with water. Like the previous owner, a really nice guy, former Navy type, he had filled the water tank because during the survey, when you first check the boat out front to back and have a professional go over it so you know what you're getting into, he couldn't get any water out of it. And the previous owner just laughed. He said, "That's because there's none in it. I didn't fill it. I left it, because I wasn't on it every day. So I did you a favor and I filled that water tank. Now it's acting like there's no water in it. So we'll chase that down tomorrow and figure it out. But because you got to have water. You can't live on it if you don't have water. So from that perspective, there's some interesting challenges that are going to come along. Some of the things I have to do, like change the fuel filters, and I now know how much fuel I have on board. Carries about 330 gallons. I think I have about 280 on board right now, so I'll top it off. But yeah, we're just having a ball out here. I can't wait to get started. We're going to be cruising up and down the Pacific Northwest. The nice thing is, won't interrupt our show because we will have satellite internet, so that no matter where we are, you and I will still be able to do this. So that's a little update on what we've been up to. Oh, by the way, I should mention we also started a YouTube channel about that. It's called The Next 10 Years. You can just, when you go to YouTube, I'll put a little plug in for it. Google Summer Song, The Next 10 Years. The name of the boat is Summer Song, like a song you sing in the summer. And you Google that on YouTube, and it'll come up, and it's Allison and I spending about 2 minutes explaining just a little bit about what we want to do with the channel and where we're at right now and how things as we see them unfolding. So I hope that people will like and subscribe to that page and join us on this adventure.
So what is the URL again?
It's on YouTube, and I have it pulled up right here on this other. I'll just copy and paste this, and I should copy. There we are. Be able to put it in our little backrooms chat, and if you can put it up for others, you can do that too. Let's see. I got to go to paste. I can't read. Where the heck is paste? Back, forward, reload, save, print, search, image. Why didn't paste come up? I know why. Because I didn't put it in the right place. There we go. Click on that. There we are, and I'll send it like that. There you go. So that's a link to the channel that we're on, and you can keep track of the nonsense we're up to. And we are going to show as much of daily life on board as we can, so that people have an idea of, should they think along these lines, they have somebody that they maybe know a little bit that they can talk to, because we of course will answer questions that come up in the chat, in the comments below the videos. So there you go.
I'm just looking at the URL here, and I want to copy it, and I want to put it up here. Just give me a second, guys. Yeah. So while you're out there, Nick, and you're settling in, while you were on your way driving, you probably noticed that. Just a second here.
There you go.
There we go. There's Nick's YouTube channel.
Well,
I haven't
it's
tested
Allison
it, by the way.
together, but yeah.
I don't know if it works.
Well, give it a click.
Well, now I have to. You're making this too complicated for me.
All right, don't worry about it.
Test it out.
If it doesn't work, we'll hear about it soon enough.
Oh, you know what? I could test it while you were traveling out there, Nick. Of course, there it is. Navigating the next 10. So that's your ship. That's your.
Yep, that's the
That's the
vessel.
boat.
That's the boat. That's Summer Song.
Okay, very good.
So you can see why I was thinking motor torpedo boat when I looked at it.
Well, of course, I knew that.
Yeah, I knew you knew that, and I think a lot more people than you give credit for would have. Once I said PT 109, would have got it.
PTF what? Well, not, but not everybody knows that. Okay, not everybody is conversant with first and foremost the terminology, but second the movie and the story behind PT 109, and why in fact that became such a famous patrol boat. I mean, quite
Well, it
frankly,
was just one
why
of
would why would any PT boats become famous? Well, this one became famous because it was skippered by John F. Kennedy,
future,
the future
right, a future
president of the
president.
United States.
Because when you look at her war record, she's nothing compared to some of the motor torpedo boats and gunboats that we had during the war. You look at Cornelius Burke and guys like that, they make him look like a Boy Scout by comparison. But it's an American show, and it's about a guy who becomes president later on when the war is over. So, okay,
Sure.
I get it.
Um,
Anyway,
and so on your way out there, a Canadian icon, Gordon Lightfoot, passes away.
yes,
And Gordon Lightfoot, aside from the fact that, as you pointed out when we were discussing him prior to the show tonight, aside from the fact that he played a 12-string guitar, which is not all that common, it's
part of his style.
yeah. So in fact, I actually I'm not sure that I know anyone else that plays a 12-string, but he played 12-string. But what was really, I think, was unique about Gordon Lightfoot was his style of singing.
Hmm.
It was very unique. Not the tone of the voice, but the way he enunciated his words. I found that he would draw out his consonants quite long, and see, you never thought when you mentioned Gordon Lightfoot, you never thought that I'd be able to give you that kind of an in-depth analysis of his singing.
That is true.
Yeah, I was not a very big Gordon Lightfoot fan. He did do a couple of songs that I enjoyed that stick out of my mind. The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the
Well,
Ballad of
that's
the
his
Edmund
iconic
Fitzgerald, of
song,
course,
right?
is one of the famous ones. And he did one in the early 70s, which just goes to show you how old he was. The early 70s, he did one called Black Day in July, which you can look it up on YouTube. You can find that particular music on YouTube, but for whatever reason, it was not. You would never find it anywhere else. It would never be somewhere in the hits of Gordon Lightfoot. But I think he wrote that song around the time of the riots in the States in the late '60s, and so he
What,
wrote.
Kent University and all that?
Not Penn University. I think it's like I'm speaking here. I'm just assuming, but it wasn't Penn University for
It was
sure.
Kent.
It was the actual riots in the cities, where there was a lot of burning buildings down, etc.
Right.
And that's sort of the gist of it. Uh, Other than that, I mean, there were other songs iconic songs that I have in my head, but I don't really know the titles to. But
Well, he had a whole litany. He had one called Sundown.
Sundown, yeah, that was
Yeah,
one.
Sundown. He had the Canadian Railway Trilogy. Of course, Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Just the thing about Gordon Lightfoot was he wasn't a performer that you would go to watch for the entertainment value. Yes, he entertained, but he was a storyteller. He was a balladeer, or in the
Yeah.
days of, in the medieval times, he would have been called a bard. So traveling around telling stories about the people he encountered. He had a huge influence on a lot of people. Everybody from Stan Rogers was influenced by him. because nobody who tells stories, he was the guy who kind of led the way. The only other comparable person I can think of in that genre of that era would be Ian Tyson. He was
Okay.
another. He was more of a Western kind of character, a
Right.
cowboy more than he was a balladeer. Gordon Lightfoot covered a much broader spectrum, as did Stan Rogers. But I encountered a guy, and I may have mentioned him before, back in Wilno about 10 years ago, maybe even longer than that. His name was Angus Finnan, and he was hugely influenced by Gordon Lightfoot. He loved the ballads. He was, when you look at some of his songs, you can almost hear the ghost of Gordon Lightfoot's attitude in those songs. Everything from O'Shaughnessy's Lament to Swing Boy Swing, all kinds of different stories from all kinds of different quarters in Canada. And that, I think, is what set Gordon Lightfoot apart. Anne Murray was a little bit like that, not quite so much. She really was almost a one. I don't want to call her one hit wonder for Snowbird, but when you think of Anne Murray, what other song comes to mind, right? It really is that one. So he had a place that in Canadian culture and in Canadian music that nobody else has been able to duplicate. And in a way, he's Canadian royalty in from that perspective. You know, he's not a crown prince or anything, or a newly ordained king or newly coronated king, which we'll get into later. But it's very unique and rare to see a Canadian become successful in Canada in the music and the arts. And Gordon Lightfoot did that in spades.
Well, depending on how one defines successful, of course. It's not like he got rich on his royalties, but I mean, I'm sure he made a comfortable living. Don't get me wrong, but the truth is that making it big in Canada is not the same as making it big in the United States, which is why so many artists end up going and focusing their attention on marketing their music in the United
Right.
States and outside of Canada, because the Canadian market is fairly strong. And this opens up a whole discussion, which I don't think we're going to get into tonight, but that is the whole area of government um, regulating what we watch and what we listen to, particularly on radio stations, and determining or trying to encourage Canadian content. Well, not just that, but actually mandating Canadian content on radio stations that play music. And there's a lot of music by musicians that I say, and I say this with all due respect because I'm not a musician. I mean, I don't have the gift, I know music, but I know music more from an academic point of view. I studied
Right.
music for quite some time. I play a number of instruments, and I read music, and that, but my knowledge is much more. It's more technical. I know music. I don't feel music, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Not to
I
sound
think I
too
do.
esoterical or anything like that.
But I think that when I say that Gordon Lightfoot was successful here in Canada, I mean there's not many people who don't know the name. They might not really understand why they know the name, but there's a vast majority of Canadians know the name Gordon Lightfoot.
Right.
And from that, if you wanted to find success that way, he certainly was. Because you're right about the financial side. You can run down a list as long as your arm. Candy, what's his name? Jim Carrey, just
Oh,
Mike
listen,
Short. What's his name? Martin
Nick,
Short.
Nick, we could do a whole show of just naming the Canadian actors and actresses and performers who moved south and made it big.
Yeah,
Names that you would never even think of, that you don't realize.
it's almost
Um,
like a place where no man has gone before.
uh, William Shatner, Bill Shatner. I knew well people who went to school with Bill Shatner in
Oh, I thought you
Montreal.
said you knew him.
No, I don't know Bill Shatner. I know people that went to school with him. Well, I did. Now, time is getting on, right? So a lot of these people, Bill Shatner is quite old. He's in his 80s, I believe
I
now.
was going to say the same thing. He's about the same vintage as Gordon Lightfoot was.
So he's not a young man. But we could do, let's say, like a whole show on this. I mean, Bill Shatner, Lauren Green, of course.
Oh,
The,
Lauren
the, the
Green,
big thing,
yes.
the fun thing about Lauren Green was every time you'd call Lowell up and call him Lauren,
You lose it.
he would go apoplectic. Yeah,
I don't
and
know.
so people would do that just to get under his skin.
Of
But
course.
Lauren Green, of course, was born and raised in Ottawa, as was Paul Anka.
Yep.
And those are just Ottawa. Oh, Peter Jennings. Peter Jennings was Canadian.
He did a video about 10 years ago explaining Canada to Americans, and he did a smash up job on it. He really nailed it.
Did he?
I don't know if you've ever seen it. Just Peter Jennings explains Canada to Americans, and it was during the our time in Afghanistan, I think. And boy, did he do a good job. You really should look that up.
I will.
Yeah.
Peter Jennings, of course, was a graduate of Carleton University.
Now that I didn't know.
Yeah.
But
we could go, like I said, we could go on and on.
Oh yeah. We haven't even mentioned Celine Dion or not Terry Fox. What's this guy? He's got Parkinson's. Michael J. Fox.
Oh, Michael J. Fox is Canadian. Yeah.
Yep.
No, it's worth doing a show. We should put that in our list of things to cover off, to do a segment just on this, because it's first of all, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating topic to start with. Okay.
The guy who played Scotty, he's Canadian, right?
Sure.
Did you know he was missing 2 fingers on one of his hands?
Yeah, he lost his fingers during D-Day. He was
during D-Day.
Yeah,
that's right. So they always tried to shoot him with either that hand in his pocket or out of sight, because he didn't want it to be distracting from the character.
Yeah. Well, you see, now you're getting me. This is talking about rabbit holes. You want to pull me down another rabbit hole here, because we could do a whole segment on Star Trek, the original series Star Trek, of course, and all of the precedents that were set by that show. People look at it and go, "Oh, just one of those 1960s science fiction series," which of course is true. But there were a lot of things going on with Star Trek in terms of the production, etc. Like, for instance, did you know that the first interracial kiss on network television in North America was on Star Trek?
Yes, what Star Trek did. Gene Roddenberry was a genius, because what he did the first incantation of the show he wanted was Wagon Train to the Skies. He wanted to take a Western and put it in space. That was his original idea. But what he did was he dealt with hot button issues in a way that it wasn't in your face. Like, there was an episode I remember quite well about, you come to this planet and everybody there is black on one side, white on the other.
Right.
And they were at war with each other. Because
not everybody.
What's that?
Not everybody. Because they weren't at the planet at first. They picked up one of the guys who was black on one side and white on the other side, and who was being chased by somebody who was black on white on the other sides, the opposite.
Yeah, that was my point. That's where I was going.
And eventually they got to the planet, and they discovered that everybody on the planet had destroyed. The planet had been destroyed, or civilization on the planet had been destroyed, and these were the only 2 survivors.
All because of that. There was another one. He talked about the need to have a military, because the populations on the planet were at war with each other, and you'd have a simulated strike hit a city, and a certain percentage of the population had to go to these.
Right. That was a different episode.
It was. But
yeah,
he ended it by saying, listen, you either figure out how to solve this and bring this war to an end, or you better start building guns and bombs, because you can't keep this up. You're going to have to settle this one way or the other.
Well,
And it was
and you know, and there was a very important, I think, a very important object lesson in that episode. See, we could do like a whole podcast on Star Trek.
oh yeah,
Surely, somebody else has done this already. But here's the interesting story, the interesting lesson in that particular story, in that particular episode, and that was that um, they destroyed Kirk. Bill Shatner, Captain Kirk, destroyed the computers on one planet that was controlling the simulated attack. It was a virtual attacks,
right.
and then the computer would calculate how many people would have died in these attacks, and these people then they would be
Randomly
notified that they had
selected.
died, so they would report to a place where they would commit suicide.
Yeah,
And so what they did was the idea was that they had found a way to fight a war without any kind of destruction. So it was like the most civilized warfare you could think of. And Captain Kirk destroys the computer that is controlling all of this on one planet. And of course, now the other planet is thinking, okay, they violated their treaty. Now we have to start shooting with real weapons. And so the guys on this one planet say, do you know what you did? And Kirk says, very famously, and I think it's a brilliant lesson. He said, yes, I've given you back all of I've given you back the destruction, the disease, the death, okay? All of the things that make a war something to be avoided. So you either end it or you go back to the real thing.
yeah.
I you know, it's interesting that you brought this subject, this particular episode up, Nick, because back during the Balkan Wars in the 1990s,
The Vulcan Wars. Yeah.
okay, no, one of the things that is this idea that the international community can step in and what provide humanitarian aid, okay, in order to mitigate the results of warfare. And at that time, I said something in a particular meeting that was very unpopular. You can't imagine me saying anything that's
I
unpopular, right?
never couldn't do it.
But I pointed out, I said, and I cited this Star Trek episode. I said, if you really want to end the war, maybe we should be rethinking our not taking sides and simply providing humanitarian aid because we want to mitigate the damage and the effect of the warfare. The fact is that sometimes, and this was Winston Churchill pointed this out, in international relations, sometimes you have to let the two sides fight it out to a conclusion, one way or the other.
That's right.
But by mitigating the effects of the war, what you're really doing is you're removing all of those things that are reasons not to prolong the war, and as a consequence, you're prolonging it. So how are you helping? Yes, I understand the sentiment. You want to be helpful, you want to be compassionate in that. But in doing it the way you're doing it, you're removing so many of the bad effects of a war, which are precisely the reasons why you need to stop it in the first place. So it has the opposite effect. And I always
Well,
thought that was a very brilliant observation by Churchill. And it was played out in that particular Star Trek episode.
which is also you can trace that back all the way to General Lee of the American Civil War, who said very quite famously and quite rightly, "It is good that war is ugly, lest we grow too fond of it." And what they've done is that episode, they took the ugliness away, and
right,
now people are fond of the war.
precisely.
1984 was the same thing, by the way. You never actually saw any war. All you saw were statistics and people being taken away, to fight on the front, but you never got the chance to meet or understand the enemy. There's so many facets to this. But go back to Star Trek for a minute. Some of the things that they used that seemed so futuristic at the time. Okay, they had tricorders. Well, we have cell phones. Tell me what the difference is.
Smartphones.
We have communications where, you just a little touch on your shirt and you'd be able to talk to somebody. Same thing. You have handheld weapons that are deadly, beyond anything in now. How far away are we removed from that? is just space travel in general. They're even working on teleportation right now. Now, it's still very, very early, and I'm certainly not stamping no telepad to go anywhere based on what we know now, but that's a direction they're moving in, all because Gene Roddenberry couldn't figure out how to land NCC 1701. Was it D? Anyway, he couldn't land the Enterprise, so he figured either by shuttle or by beaming down to the planet.
And with that, we're gonna beam in a commercial break. So stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back in a little more than 2 minutes here on the Nick and Joe Show.
Ice cream. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Ice cream. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. That strawberry chocolate taste. Ice cool vanilla for me. Hundreds and thousands. I need an ice cream island. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Strawberry sauce. And see my face gleam. I need a wafer on top. Just ice cream full stop. So take me to the pudding shop. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. That strawberry chocolate taste.
There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look, I think this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look, I think this might.
All right, welcome back, everybody. This is the Nick and Joe Show. I'm Nick. He's Joseph. He's there, and I'm here. If you don't want to know where all those places are, then you need to go back to the previous segment and watch.
And you probably noticed that I'm a little taller because in the break I got my cushions to sit on my chair. There we go. I'm much more comfortable
I was
now.
hoping you didn't. I was hoping you didn't see too much of this, because it's boats gently rocking left and right as other boats go by, and the tide's coming in, so stuff like that's
We're getting
affecting the
seasick.
movement of the boat.
Seasick.
Yeah, no, it takes a little more than that.
Well, you know, the first lesson that I was taught on my first significant period of time at sea is that there is no such thing as people who don't get seasick. But it depends on how much rolling and pitching the ship is doing. But as I'm sure you know, Nick, okay, there are times when especially in the winter time in the North Atlantic, boy, gosh, there are times when it's just food. No. Not happening, guys.
Now, add to that the smell of diesel fuel and no horizon.
Okay, so now listen. For you guys below decks,
That's right.
listen. I there's a just while I'm remembering it, Nick. Okay, and for our listeners and our viewers, okay, this is just us going off on a tangent. So we're going to get to some serious stuff in a minute. But I just want to tell you, I've been watching a documentary on the Battle of Britain, and I'm not sure when it was made, but it's fairly recent. Now, you remember the movie, The Battle of Britain? I believe it was
Yep.
the movie, The Battle of Britain, was filmed in 1969.
Yeah, right around the same time as A Bridge Too Far was.
Right. So, and the footage, this like the movie, The Battle of Britain, with a huge all-star cast, by the way, was filmed before we had computer generated imagery.
That's right.
So almost all of the aerial combat scenes are actually vintage aircraft that were used in order to film the battle scenes as realistically as they possibly could.
Right.
Okay, and some of the footage in that movie is spectacular, especially because it's real. Okay, why am I telling you this? Because these guys, whoever put this documentary together, and it's on YouTube, you can get it for free. Whoever put this documentary together, what they did was they went back to the original film from that movie, and they took all of the footage that never made it into the movie to show some reenactment, some graphical examples of the play. It is spectacular, the footage.
I'm gonna have to watch that because it's one of my favorite movies.
It's amazing just seeing these and knowing that not only that they're real aircraft, but that that they're being piloted by real pilots, and just the scenery and and it really captures, as did the movie, but this documentary even more so, in my mind, really captured the essence of that summer in England, which I'm led to believe was a fantastic summer in terms of weather. The climate was great. It wasn't too hot. It was sunny most days. The greenery of that part of the world it's just luscious. And you have to see, but I know if you watch it, you will appreciate the flight footage.
Now, one of the things about the original, because it didn't have CG, because they going down these putting them at risk, a better way to put it. There's, I think, models, and they would blow them up. I would simulate aircraft. There's one ME-1. There's a German twin-engine medium bomber that must have got down 14 times. They use the same
the actual blowing up or the actual crashing was done with models.
Yeah, that's right.
But a lot of times, what they would do is they would have an aircraft to simulate that it was being shot down. It was the real aircraft, and they'd have like a smoke producer or whatever, something like that on it.
Right.
And then show it, starting to spin down and that. And of course, you've done some flying yourself, so one of the things that you have to study, that you do as a practical matter when you're getting your pilot's license, is you actually take an aircraft up and at a sufficient altitude, and you actually put it into a spin, and then so that you learn how to come out of a spin.
Right.
Spinning, spiral dive, and the other one is a stall. And I was telling my wife, we were just watching some of this footage this afternoon, and I said to her, when I say this now, when I say you have to have the stomach for it, I don't mean that in terms of you have to have the courage for it. You literally have to have the stomach for the ups and downs and ins and outs. But it's just, flying a small aircraft, a high performance single engine aircraft, and just weaving in around in some of the training areas and stuff like that. It is so incredible. And one last thought, Nick. Sorry, I'm sort of taking over the show here, but one last thought. Because before I started flying single engine aircraft, I flew gliders, and there is nothing in the world to compare to soaring with a glider. Nothing. It's
Well,
just so peaceful. The only thing that comes close is scuba diving.
I've always said about gliders, they're wonderful. They will fly you right to the crash site.
No, glider, unlike a single engine aircraft, you can actually stay up in a glider indefinitely if
In a
you know
thermal.
how to ride thermals.
That's right. Yeah. Sooner or later, though, your bladder gets the best of you, and you have to come down. The old saying about what goes up must come down is true even for gliders. And
Now,
I'm just poking a little
it's
bit of
not.
fun at glider because I did it too when I was in Air Cadets. We'd go out and they take those old, I couldn't even tell you what kind of gliders they were.
How old are
Uh,
you? You're 60. You flew Schweitzer 222s and
is
233s.
is that what they were?
Yeah.
And they were, you'd be hauling along behind the tow plane. You'd pull that knob on the button, and all of a sudden she'd drop.
Oh, listen,
The speed would drop like a rock.
listen,
But you're right.
listen.
And then the pilot would bring it back down, and the next kid would go up.
Yeah, listen. Forget about tow planes. Winch launches were the best, and you have not
Never done it.
experienced, okay, anything. If you haven't experienced a cable break on a winch launch.
Sorry, that doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, Joseph.
It's not. It is. It's not a dangerous situation. I mean, if you know what you're doing, and again, you trained to be able to react to these things. But I'll tell you, it is one of the most frightening experiences you can think of.
We're not all that high off the ground.
But it's not just that. It's picture this, okay? It's like the centrifugal force, okay? Because you're not being towed, you're being pulled like a kite. So you
Right.
go airborne, but all of the centrifugal force is not up; it's out.
Yes, of course. Because the
So when
wings are
that
lifted.
cable breaks, you don't just keep going up and you don't go down. You end up just in a split second, you're going up and out when that cable breaks. And of
That makes
course,
sense.
you go out, and the minute you go out, what's the next thing that happens?
You
Instantly,
lose your airspeed.
you stall.
That's right.
So you could be like at 500 feet, and the cable breaks, and you go up, and then all of a sudden, like
Down.
that. This is how somebody invented the term. Your stomach is in your throat.
Yeah.
Because it almost literally is in your throat, I'm telling you.
You better have your feet on the rudder pedals, and you better have your hand on the stick when that happens.
But look, I will say this, Nick, on this topic before we move on. It's such a shame that we don't encourage youth today to do these kinds of activities. Teenagers today have become so coddled, so bubble wrapped. And I'm not criticizing teenagers here. I'm not saying, oh, you're soft, you're snowflakes. That's a separate issue and stuff like that. But we don't give them the opportunity to experience these things. Okay, and it's I was as a teenager. I've mentioned before, I grew up with guns. We had guns all over the place. Okay, as a teenager, I entered into a number of shooting competitions, and in fact, I have won a slew of medals in shooting competitions, including some international shooting competitions. Now, you're just afraid to allow younger people, let alone anyone, let alone younger people, handle weapons properly.
Yeah, it's tragic.
It's a shame.
I remember being part of the rifle team for my Air Cadet Squadron down in Leamington when I was a kid, and everybody wanted to be on that team. And I'll tell you what, like, I'm a pretty fair shot. I'm certainly no, sniper from 2 miles away, put a bullet through the eye of a needle or anything, but I can hit the target, and it was something we all really enjoyed. The drill team, if you had a good squadron, and the rifle team, those are the two that everybody wanted to be part of. It was a lot of fun. We had our own range. You'd go downstairs. Safety, oh my good lord, because these were single shot rifles.
Right.
So you had to fire the round, eject the casing, pick up another round, put it in. You couldn't get more safe. And the range safety officer is standing right behind you. One false move, he takes away your rifle and you're off the range. So nobody wanted to make any mistakes. So it was those days, though, like the last time I saw any cadet with a rifle, it was you remember the old lever action Daisy BB guns from when you were a kid? They had a muzzle velocity about 250 feet per second. You could see the BB go through the air. Okay, that's what they were doing. They were laying down in the middle of a drill hall, shooting cardboard with a BB gun. I'm sorry, and that was the last of that. They took those away too.
Well,
Archery suffers the same problem. It's dangerous. Yes, well, so is stepping off a curb.
Well,
sooner or
the thing is
later
like
you got
this.
to take a risk.
The thing is like this: you have to learn responsibility. The way you learn responsibility is to be given responsibility.
That's right.
And if this is not an academic thing, and I like to point out to people that today, I mean, I don't know. I don't know, Nick. I don't know where I'm going with this. I was by the time I was 20 years old, I was chasing Russian submarines in the North Atlantic. Okay, that's all I could say. Today,
and I was hoping Russian submarines didn't find us.
yeah, because you guys down there in the boiler rooms were not in a very good spot.
Well, our motto was first aboard, first ashore, first aboard, last ashore, first to die.
Yes.
That's
and while we're on this subject, how can I let the occasion pass without pointing out that when it was time to seal the ship, okay, I was one of the guys that was going to be giving orders to kill you.
Thanks.
No offense, but
no, of course not. No, I know exactly what you mean. But something. Those are the kind of risks we accepted when we signed the line. To
never even thought about it, to be honest.
Okay, but look, in retrospect, that's what we were doing.
It is.
Did we
yes.
know what we were doing? Probably not. But you can't say that after a year you didn't understand what you were doing. You take the Kootenay explosion as an example. When that gearbox exploded and 9 guys died, they had to close the hatch on the engine room crew because otherwise they're going to lose the whole ship.
Yeah,
it doesn't take a rocket science to figure that out. As ugly and horrific as that is one of the risks you face when you put on the Queen or now the King's uniform. So you do it and hope you never have to go down that road. But if you do, that's what they pay you for.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the coronation before we go for the next break.
Okay,
it's a good way to segue into the coronation. So I watched last night. We're broadcasting on Sunday night, so Saturday night I watched the a rebroadcast of the coronation ceremony. I watched it on YouTube, so thankfully I was able to sort of fast forward from time to time through some of the long and the boring parts. But it was really quite fascinating. Let me tell you, first of all, just to get it out of the way, okay, yes, the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, was there. His wife was not, but he was there and he was sitting with the family. Not in the front row, but he was sitting with the family. and I kind of thought that was nice. Okay,
Yeah.
but that's all I want to say about Prince Harry and his wife for this whole conversation. I just want to get it out of the way. Oh, and so was Prince Andrew was there as well. So, but my main takeaways, aside from the fact that the tradition around all of this, the ornamentation, the ritual, I think I'm a very big believer in tradition, and I'm a very big believer in ritual. Uh, but there wasn't a lot of explanation of the historical significance of some of the ritual. And so, somebody might say, well, this is part of, like, why is he making this oath? Why is he talking about the defending the establishment or the settlement and stuff? Like, what does that even mean? So I was a little regretful that they didn't spend more time discussing in the commentary the significance of some of the stuff that he was doing and some of the ornaments that he's being adorned with. Not that he's going to use any of this stuff in day-to-day life or anything like that, but the symbolism of it. So that was one thing. But the other thing I have to tell you was, Nick, I know Charles is in his 70s. I don't recall exactly how old he is, but he's in his 70s. So he's not a young man. And I didn't know this until last night. But I realize now, because somebody commented on this during the coronation ceremony, that Charles is the oldest monarch to be crowned in British history, which is
Really?
funny because his mother was the longest serving monarch, and
Mhm.
so I guess it's kind of fits, right? But I even a week ago when I saw Charles in the news, okay, he looks 70 years old. He's not a young man. But when I saw him last night sitting on the throne, when they placed the crown on his head, and I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, this is an old man. I mean, he really looked his age during this ceremony.
Yeah.
He looked older and dare I even say a little decrepit. And I felt a little bad, but of course it is what it is. He is who he is, and that's the way it goes. But I don't know how long he's going to reign for. I mean, he could reign for 25 years, 25 years, I suppose,
He
theoretically.
does
But
come from a very long-lived
he,
family, that's for sure.
well, that's true. But my goodness gracious, he is not. He looked his age and more during the
Well,
ceremony.
not in his defense. Let me put it to you this way: the fact he looked his age, as you put it, or decrepit, maybe that might be a little harsh, but
It is.
I didn't watch any of the ceremony because of the circumstances I find myself in now. It just wasn't easy. Couldn't do it. So
Okay.
we didn't as much as, and I find a lot of the pomp and ceremony to be dull and boring. Although I take your point about explaining, like, what's that big star in his chest for? Why is he wearing that sash? Where does all this fit in? How did they get to the point where they adorn this guy with this stuff? You're right, it's all symbolic. By the way, the star is the Order of the Bath, I think. He's the head of the Order of the Bath. But anyway, that's a different story. But the the thing is, from a guy who just spent a week driving across the country, almost, I won't say coast to coast, but at least half of it.
You're
I know how
referring to yourself,
exhausting.
not Charles here.
I
Right.
am, not Charles. I'm talking about me and my wife. We traveled, about 3,000 miles, if you believe Google or Google Maps. And by the time we got here, we're still not quite up to speed yet. Like, it took a lot out of us to get this far. So imagine that you're the king, or you're going to be crowned the king, and all the demands on your time and how much little influence you have in what's going to happen. I won't say you're a puppet, but you follow along like a dog on a leash. Your Majesty, we need you here. Your Majesty, we need you there. Your Majesty, it's time for this. Your Majesty. His whole day was choreographed from beginning to end for how long? A month, maybe more. So the fact he looks tired sitting on the throne, I get it. I understand that. Now, what will he look like 2 weeks from now, a month from now, when the weight of that crown really begins to bear down on his head? Because it's one thing to be crowned, it's another to wear it. So we'll see. I will agree. I don't think he's going to be the longest reigning monarch in British history by any stretch. I mean, I think those men sitting around him, his sons, and royal members of the family, you're going to see a much younger king the next time around. And I don't know how far off in the distance that's going to be. But the one thing, I got a couple minutes here. From a Canadian point of view, I like the monarchy. I like that tie to the tradition as you do. I like that tie to I don't want to call it regimentalism, but it's a nod to our past, that Britain is the greatest influencer in what Canada became. I'm not denigrating any other culture and their influences, but let's be honest about it. It was because of Great Britain and their monarchs that helped form the majority of Canadian culture and character. And that that I don't think is something you easily cast aside. No matter how modern Canadians who are, let's call them progressive, we don't need the monarchy, let's become a republic. Yeah, well, you can do that if you want to, but you're throwing away 250, 300 years worth of history if you do that. And some people just don't care. They don't understand the significance. And I really believe the old saying that if you don't know who you were, you won't know who you are. And that's kind of where I come down on all this. It's time that we stand up and be proud of our British heritage, not ashamed of it, because there's far more good in it than there is bad.
Well, and as in every civilization, nobody's perfect, but as I like to tell people, okay, I do think, you call me a supremacist if you want, but I do think that our culture is a superior culture based on the criteria that I think is important. Okay, but um, but that doesn't mean that we're perfect. Uh, but we have a capacity in Western civilization and Western culture to reflect on how we do things and why we do things, and to make changes and adjustments along the way to improve our acts, to correct those things that need to be corrected. But at the same time, as in economics, one does not know, when it comes to history and social policy and social norms and what we would call tradition, one does not know ultimately what the consequences of abandoning a particular traditional way of doing things are. Okay, uh, and I like to say that we are the beneficiaries of the collective wisdom of our ancestors, and that's not to say that we're slaves to tradition, but we need to respect the fact that a tradition is something that means something, and it's become a standard way of doing things for a reason. And over a period of time, often we lose sight of what those reasons were, and maybe they don't even exist anymore. But again, this is why I don't argue for no change. I argue for gentle change. Don't tear things down, which is the liberal approach, the progressive approach to doing things. Respect the traditional way of doing things while you're finding ways to improve them in order to address the circumstances that exist today. And again, it all comes down to not being arrogant, having the sense of knowing what you don't know. Okay, I don't know what the result of getting rid of the monarchy would be, except to say that it would open up a whole can of constitutional worms in this country. You can't just say, let's get rid of the monarchy, because our entire system of law and our whole political system is centered on, in the first place, the monarchy. It's possible to divest ourselves of the monarchy, but what are the results of that? What are the consequences of doing that? I don't know. Maybe there are none. But it's the whole idea of it's not relevant today, therefore I'm not in a position on this or any other traditional way of doing things to say, and I think it's a very arrogant statement to make, that it's not relevant to us anymore. I don't know whether it's relevant or not. I really don't. So maybe it isn't, but maybe it is, and we just don't know it. Nick, we're going to have to go for another break. So stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Nick and Joe Show.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Nick and Joe Show. I'm Nick. He's Joseph. And we are talking. We spent the first hour in a very interesting conversation about a lot of stuff.
Just about everything you could think of.
Yeah, and some things you couldn't have.
You know, one of these days we're going to come back from a commercial break and they're going to catch us dancing to that music there, Nick. It's just, I got to get some shanty songs up for.
Yes.
That'll make you happy.
That will make me happy. Lever Johnny and Wellerman and Rolling Down to Old Maui, you name it. And Nellie J. Banks. Oh, I could list off hundreds of them. Anyway,
so Nick,
yes.
you finally, after a lot of talking, a lot of soul searching, a lot of planning, making arrangements, bouncing around, etc., you and your wife have finally landed in your dream position out on the coast in your boat.
We did.
And all I could say is just think of all of those years that you wasted dreaming about refurbishing that boat at the end of your laneway.
Yeah, let me tell the story behind that boat.
Okay.
We were at a situation where we were thinking about getting a cottage somewhere, place for, go get off the farm and go. And I forget how it happened, but we ended up down in Toronto. We had gone down to St. Catharines to look at a boat. I think it was only a 24-footer or something like that, and came away from that going, And we didn't have tons of money to spend. So we showed up on Woodlawn near the Woodlawn racetrack, out there, and parked in the yard of this big farm was this 36-foot Taylorcraft twin-engined cabin cruiser. And my wife looked at me. She said, "Honey, buy that for me." Now, I try to be a good husband. I really do. So I said the very first two words that came to my mind that every good husband says when their wife makes a request like that. I said, "Yes, dear." So we bought it. We trailered it back to the farm. We put it up, and I started to work on it. And it didn't take me very long at all to figure out I had no idea what I was doing. And more importantly, I did not have the financial reserves necessary to do it justice. So it sat there, and it sat there, and it sat there, and it's still there. Last time we were up in the valley, guess what's still at the end of the driveway? Is that poor old boat. It was one of three that were built by a guy called J.J. Taylor, and it was a remarkable vessel. It's just I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I didn't have the money, and I didn't have the skills. Unlike our current situation, we were not in that situation at all. So there it is, still sitting there.
So you've landed now in British Columbia,
Mm-hmm.
and as you're driving into British Columbia, the government of British Columbia, the health authorities at the government, decide that they're going to remove a whole bunch more of the old COVID restrictions, the vaccine restrictions, and they're following the example of the city of Hamilton that just last week decided that they were no longer going to require city staff, including paramedics, childcare workers, etc., that they are going to drop the vaccination mandate.
Right.
And then, lo and behold, today we learned that the World Health Organization has declared that the global emergency around COVID is now over. And we have not talked about COVID for quite some time, and on purpose, because everybody else was talking about COVID from conservative circles, and we wanted to be a little bit different. We wanted to sort of expand our conversation and talk about things like the royalty and Gordon Lightfoot and everything else.
All the important things in life.
The important things in life, okay? All right. And let's not forget the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Go Leafs, go. They're tied 2-2 right now.
Okay. So, but I guess the thing that I need to know, the question that I need to ask in response to the latest round of lifting of restrictions, lifting of mandates, and now this declaration by the World Health Organization that the COVID emergency has ended. My question is, what exactly is it that we did? What is the event? What is the measure that we took that all of the sudden has brought us to a point where there's no more emergency? If the COVID virus is as deadly as we've always been told it was, and I'm not conceding it was, I'm just saying we were told this, then how is it that you can simply declare victory over this virus and say, well, nobody has to be vaccinated anymore? I mean, aren't you exposing people to a resurgence of the virus? The fact that we're lifting all of these mandates, and at this point in time, and the fact that the World Health Organization has made the declaration that it's made, in my view, these are the strongest examples, this is the greatest evidence that it wasn't that big a deal in the first place. Now, not that COVID didn't exist. It existed, but it wasn't as deadly. It wasn't a threat to society to the extent that it was portrayed. And I don't know that I want to hold people accountable, but surely to goodness, this was probably the biggest public policy disaster, certainly in my lifetime. And one wonders, should we really be looking now to start saying, I want to hold some people accountable for this? I'm open-minded. I don't really know how I feel about that. But this is the we're still feeling the economic consequences of what was done. And I think we set some very serious precedents in terms of controlling the population's behavior that I'm not comfortable with. And I always hate it when you set a precedent, because my rule of thumb is if it's happened once, happen again. Okay. Just a lot of people were hurt by this. In addition to the fact that we do know that there are people who got vaccinated who suffered severe health consequences as a result of that. Where do we go from here?
Okay, well, the first thing that comes to mind is, have we ever declared the war over on any other virus? Like, pick whatever one you want. Did they ever say?
Just to quickly answer that question, Nick, one that we have is smallpox.
Okay,
smallpox.
All right, but that was a real health threat. That literally killed millions across the world, but far greater than anything COVID was ever capable of.
But we've wiped it out. Smallpox exists only in labs now.
I understand that. I'm just saying that outside, let me rephrase it then, outside of smallpox, there's no other disease I can think of that's in the same category that we've said, you don't need, like, do you still get a yellow fever vaccination? Do you still get a malaria vaccination? I don't even know if you can get a malaria. What about scarlet fever? What about whooping cough? What about all these other diseases that are out there?
Diphtheria, you get vaccinated for diphtheria.
Yeah.
You still get vaccinated for polio.
Polio is a great example. No one has ever said we got to stop vaccinating because we beat it. It's over. This one, okay, it's not smallpox by any stretch, not even close. And yet now they're telling us, you can go back to normal now. Everything's fine.
Let's just emphasize this. Put an exclamation mark and on it and underline it, Nick. Okay, without eradicating the virus. In other words, people still get COVID.
That's true. Just and like that's people between that and smallpox.
People still get polio. So we still vaccinate against polio. So how can you say we no longer have to vaccinate against COVID?
Well, going back to smallpox for a minute, wasn't there a controversy about killing off the last of the smallpox virus that they have in a lab? And there was those who thought, let's get rid of this scourge and wipe it out completely. And others said, no, we need it for research.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that was...
But I do know that there are no cases of smallpox in the general population.
I totally agree with you. I'm just trying to contrast the difference between the two diseases. We have plenty of COVID virus out there, and they're saying, no, we don't need to worry about vaccine mandates anymore. And you still see remnants of the fear it caused within the population. People still walk around with masks.
Sure.
People still elbow bump. Look, I'm not telling them they shouldn't. Just don't expect me to. That's always been my attitude, and you still see it. It's something that it's almost like caused by a habit they've gotten into, and they don't ever think it through and say, does what I'm doing make sense? And the answer, of course, is no. So why do you keep doing it? Well, I'm afraid. Afraid of what? Well, COVID. But they just said, yeah, but so it's a circular argument.
Well, all I know is that if COVID has not been eradicated, so the virus is still out there and people could still catch the illness.
Yep.
And so long as it's out there and people can catch the illness, there is no justification, assuming that everything that they said about it was true originally, there's no justification for relaxing or reaching the point in time where you actually say we don't have to have mandatory vaccinations, because it's fundamentally illogical, because people still
So
get the virus, and if nobody's getting vaccinated, then we're going to have a emergence, a 14th or 15th wave. I don't know what number wave we're on now.
I stopped counting 4 waves ago.
So this to me, this is why I'm saying is this to me is a stark, unarguable admission on the part of public policy advisors, the health people, that it's okay. And if it's okay today, this is the point I know I'm repeating it, but this is, people have to get this into their heads. If it's okay today, then it's always been okay. Okay, it's
You know
the
something?
disease doesn't just,
What
you don't stop treating the disease or taking action against the disease because the number of people who are ill with it has dropped. Especially if you're making the argument that the reason the number of people who are ill has dropped is because of the measures we were taking. So this to me is a very clear admission that I don't want to say we were lied to.
Oh, well, I do. I don't have any bones saying that. I think we've been lied to from the very beginning. But what this does do, in my mind, is it tells me that the mandates were never necessary in the first place because of everything you just said. In other words, if you can drop them, you didn't need them to begin with.
If a mandate is useless now, it was useless then.
That's exactly my point. So why did you put us through 2 years of hell where people literally died in isolated bubbles who couldn't have their family join them? The health risks that we're learning more and more about every day from some of these vaccines. I'm not saying that well, that's a whole different rabbit hole. I'm not going to go down that. But the bottom line is there are known risks to this vaccine that they claim didn't exist.
Well,
and now the more research is done, the more we find.
And the Surgeon General of the United States just last week released a report where he claiming that the effect of mortality of loneliness, which was exacerbated tremendously by the isolation imposed through COVID measures, that the effect on mortality as a result of loneliness in the American population is equal to the effect of smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow. Now, that's not what I was expecting you to say, but that's remarkable because how long have we heard that message? You got to quit smoking, got to quit smoking, got to quit smoking. It's been an ongoing war. I think they've won the war, but the bottom line is that's a remarkable thing to say.
Right, and that's not me. That's the Surgeon General of the United States.
No, absolutely,
and which I'm very troubled by. I'm very troubled.
Well,
I'm not troubled by the report. I'm troubled by the fact that because there was a report and the Surgeon General is making this announcement, sounding the alarm, that's usually the precursor to creating a government program to deal with loneliness.
If there's
So,
one way to make somebody lonely, stick them in a government
well,
program.
I was thinking that the next thing we're going to have is we're going to have proposals for government run dating sites.
Oh my God! Don't give them any ideas. Wow, man,
It's
can you imagine the paperwork that would involve?
well,
No,
but
no,
how?
bad. Joseph, stop talking about that right now. They're listening.
Well, Nick, you didn't see this, but the Ontario government next academic year is implementing in grades 7 and 8 mandatory mental health literacy courses. Now, I
What?
haven't seen what the course material is going to be yet. I'm trying to track that down because you
Do
remember
you
the fun we
remember?
had with the other stuff, but this is
That's where I was just going.
just, but it's
When Dalton McGuinty brought out this new curriculum.
I don't want to make see I don't want to I want to be careful here. We're not making fun of anybody who's suffering from mental illness. Okay, please. That's not
Or
what we're talking about.
loneliness.
What I'm asking anyway, Nick, is how do you have a course in mental illness literacy? Like, what does that even mean? And it's not even treating mental illness. I just it's
I'm at a loss too.
I just
Like, what's
my
the
head
point?
wants to. Can you see my temples throbbing?
Yeah, I can. I get. You need to do this, Joseph. You need to do it a little more
A
often.
little.
No, I mean really press, reset everything. But seriously, this like I don't get the point either. I mean, are they trying to get people to recognize the signs of mental illness? Are they getting people to figure out yes, mental illness exists, or
I don't.
it's a way of combating mental illness? What's
I
the
don't.
point?
I don't know.
Yeah.
All I can tell you is, and again, forgive me, ladies and gentlemen. I am not. I have no desire to appear to be facetious, but I don't think that you need to have a course in mental illness literacy to understand that when you are suicidal, you are expressing or you have feelings of committing suicide. That what I'm saying is I don't need a course to teach me
It's
that
a,
my
it's
feelings that I want to kill myself are problematic and probably and might lead to my committing suicide. Like they're just and I wish I could say that I could dismiss my skepticism because there's no way that the government could impose so silly a curriculum on the students of this province. But then I look at the
I
stuff
don't
that we've
know.
looked at in the past and I'm thinking, okay, that
I'm thinking about
I don't know.
jumping comes in 3 phases.
Launch, flight, landing.
That's right. To throw a ball.
That's right. And you're not
Oh
allowed
my
to talk
God.
about people being fat, just round.
Yeah, round is yeah. So don't be so sure they can't find ways of introducing less intelligent curriculum because they sure have come up with some doozies in the past.
Gosh, I don't know,
Anyway,
Nick. It's
but so there's, and I'm not suggesting for a second that mental health isn't real. I have my wife ran a program to help people deal with mental issues. They are very real.
of course.
Some of them are very dangerous. But at the same time, with all that said, I'm beginning to think that some people use it like Linus's blanket. Like, don't judge me, I have mental illness. And they flee to that in order to avoid dealing with it. Maybe that could be a mental issue of its own self, in and of itself. Why did Linus have the blanket? For people who don't know, Linus is a Peanut character who could play. No, he wasn't a Peanut. That was Schroeder. He would carry around a blanket.
Linus was one of them. He was Lucy's younger brother.
Yeah. But my point was, Schroeder was. I was going to say he played piano.
Right. Schroeder
No, that
played
was
the piano.
Schroeder.
Correct.
Right. Linus always had this blanket, and if he didn't have it, his world fell apart. It was his. That's why I call it Linus's blanket.
Right, his security
It's like
blanket.
precisely, and as long as he had that, the world was fine. And I think that what we're seeing today is, at least in some cases, people don't want to be challenged for some of the choices they make, so they hide behind this facade of mental illness. It's not that they're mentally ill; they're mental cowards. Now, I don't know how widespread that is. I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody under any circumstances, because I don't know what's going on behind the eyeballs. Maybe they do have an issue, and I would be horrified to find out that I'm actually picking on somebody with a very, or being mean to somebody who actually has a real issue. So there's just no way to know. But I have a feeling, a sense, that when something like this, there's other issues, like when an issue takes on traction, there's a lot of people wanting to jump on the bandwagon and the Me Too crowd, right? Why would this be different? I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I don't think you're that far off the mark, for this simple reason, Nick, that when I was reading the remarks of the Minister of Education here in Ontario, when they announced this new curriculum change, one of the things that he said was that what we have to do is we have to spend money and hire new teachers and professionals, and the object is, one of the things is to teach children greater resiliency. And when I saw that, I just about fell off my chair, because I'm thinking, okay, guys, first of all, you can't teach mental resiliency. You can't teach mental toughness. You have to develop it. And here's the thing. Going back to what we were talking about earlier in the show, Nick, if you're not asking people, if you're not challenging them, you're not helping them to develop that resilience. And there's no better way to develop mental strength and emotional resilience than presenting young people with first of all, the opportunity to fail at whatever they're doing,
right?
And then teaching them to pick themselves up and get back on the horse, so to speak. But
Right.
to give them physical challenges as well. Okay, because
Well, that's the way it's been done for generations.
well, and not
Look at
necessarily
Rites
planned. Okay, it's just
Well, even if it was, look at rites of passage from different cultures. What do the Spartans do with their kids?
well,
Okay, I'm not suggesting that, but I'm saying they were probably, some of the toughest people on the planet. You look at other areas, go into the agrarian field, and you don't need to go back that far, but children who are raised on farms and given responsibility, they.
well, here, okay,
It's how you toughen the leather.
it takes a certain amount of mental, emotional resilience and self-discipline to get up at 4:30 every morning to milk the cows.
It does.
Okay, and that is not something that you teach. That is something that you develop through experiencing the difficulty and working your way through it. And so much of physical difficulties are actually mental manifestations of that difficulty. Okay,
Yeah.
in race running and races, they call that the mental wall. You hit the wall. It doesn't mean that physically you can't continue. It's that you have to train your mind to push forward.
Yeah.
And we're granted, we're oversimplifying things a little bit, but not a lot.
Yeah.
Not a lot. This is not as complicated as people seem to want to make it. You have
Is
to
it me?
give people the opportunity to do things physically, to take chances, to take risks, and to fail. And that's how you build mental resilience.
Yeah, and when we don't do that, when we start handing out ribbons for everybody for participation, just for showing up, we not only don't give them the chance to fail and learn, because you learn a lot more from failure than you do from success. but you denigrate and take away from those who do succeed. It's like if you had take the Victoria Cross as an example. We haven't given one out since World War II. If somebody wins one wearing a Canadian uniform, that they have done something. But if we gave them out for filling pop machines, they'd be worthless. And I guess that's really the way to stiffen people's resolve or toughen the leather, whatever you want, is give them challenges they may or may not be able to deal with the first time out.
Okay.
And let them figure out how to beat it.
Okay, we're going to have to go for a break. Final break for the evening. Ladies and gentlemen, stick with us. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Nick and Joe Show.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. It's the Nick and Joe Show. I'm Nick. He's Joe. He's in Ottawa, and I'm out here on the West Coast on Vancouver Island in the Straits of Juan de Fuca. All right.
On the Straits.
I noticed.
He's on the
Sorry?
Straits. He's floating on the Straits of Juan de Fuca.
No, I'm not. I'm tied to a dock. Well, I guess, yeah, okay, that makes sense. You can float without having to be untied in the dock. We're not quite ready to put to sea yet.
No.
Have some minor maintenance issues to overcome, but we'll get to them.
Okay.
I noticed. Go ahead.
Okay, Nick, I'm very upset. I'm very
You are.
upset. I'm very upset. I'm very upset with the foreign influence here in Canada into our democratic system, particularly the influence that's being exerted, the pressure that's being exerted on the governing Liberal Party of Canada, and the complete and utter infiltration of that political party by foreign agents, namely Hillary Clinton.
Oh yeah.
I for the life of me, if I participate from time to time in conservative oriented conferences that are not the political party, because political parties put on their conferences all the time, but
Right.
that are, we'll call them movement conferences. For years, the Manning Center, run by Preston Manning, had a conference in Ottawa, a networking conference where we talked about conservative ideas, conservative policies, and conservative oriented political parties, including different political parties at the federal level, were welcome to come and participate in this. It was not a party conference. It still goes on. It's not the Manning Center anymore. I think they call it Canada Strong and Free Conference or Networking Conference. Just last weekend, I believe it was last weekend or 2 weeks ago, was the Civitas Conference, which is it was in Toronto this year, but it changes locations on an annual basis. There are these conferences that go on, and it's not unusual to invite speakers from academia or from other political parties and movements around the world. But it's extremely unusual, and I think terribly wrong, inappropriate, to have a political party convention that is dominated by a senior political operative or candidate or former candidate outside of Canada. So I don't understand what is gotten into the heads of the guys running the Liberal Party of Canada that they would invite Hillary Clinton to be a keynote speaker at their political conference. And all I'm saying
Well,
is this not an example of explicit interference in our democratic system here in Canada?
well, let me just to underscore your point, because I completely agree with you. I think it is. How would those very same people react if at the next conservative conference they invited Donald Trump up to talk?
Great question. That's a great question.
You can bet it would be political interference up the yin yang, and it would be on every newspaper in the country,
Well,
and people would be screaming about it from the rafters.
the outrage that would
Absolutely,
ensue
would
if something like that were to
blow it.
happen, you know,
That's this mighty low hanging fruit. I mean, you could, of course, that's the obvious rebuttal to this, but at its heart, it's also true that this is part of the bias of the media. Like, why isn't this story? Why are we the only ones talking about it? It's in the National Post, I know, but in general, most people either don't read it, don't care. For some reason, this isn't nearly as big a deal for one particular side of the aisle as it would be for the others. The
well,
Toronto Star would tear this to pieces if this was a conservative event with a conservative foreign dig, and wouldn't even have to be Donald Trump. It could be the president of Poland or the Czech Republic, both hardcore conservatives, or the prime minister of Italy. Okay, bring them in. You'd have the same thing because you've got foreign powers giving advice to Canadian potential politicians or politicians about how to run their country.
well,
That's outside interference.
it's even more than that, Nick. It's when the whole purpose of these conferences is to showcase the political party in order to obtain votes. So the only reason you would bring Hillary Clinton in would be to get her to say to Canadian voters, "Hey, vote conservative, vote liberal." Okay, Justin Trudeau, he's the man. And of course, how appropriate or how inappropriate is it for a foreign dignitary to come to Canada and tell Canadians, whatever you do, don't vote for Pierre Poilievre or the Conservatives because they're bad people. It is just such bad form. And as you say, yeah, absolutely. If the shoe was on the other foot here and it was Donald Trump coming and speaking at a conservative conference, and by the way, if Donald Trump was ever invited to speak at a conservative conference, I would have the same criticism. Okay, rest assured. I don't play favorites here. It's not appropriate for a foreign dignitary to come to this country and to involve themselves in domestic political debate. They have no business doing that, and shame on the Liberal Party for organizing this And shame on the mainstream media for not making a big deal of this, like they're making a big deal out of Chinese interference in our electoral process.
which is completely acceptable. I mean, when I'm not saying the interferences, but for them to go after that,
Of
to
course,
turn a blind eye to this
and they
is
should.
remarkable at the very
But
least.
this is at least with the Chinese. Here's the thing, okay? With Chinese interference, I don't actually know what the facts are. I know there are allegations of it. I haven't seen any intelligence reports, so I don't really know what's going on. But this is so blatant, in your face.
Yeah,
There's nothing hidden here.
The-
There's no
there,
shame.
there are certainly times when bringing in a foreign leader to have a discussion with Canadian politicians and policymakers and so on is appropriate. Like when you're talking about international
Exactly.
affairs. Okay, that I get because that's a pool we all swim in. Okay, so let's say I'll go back to the Czech Republic. We bring the Czech member of the president of the Czech Republic, and he wants to speak to the House of Commons on a common issue that we have. Let's say Ukraine. Okay, that affects both countries. So if by invitation we bring him in, then he has every right to come in and share whatever he wants to with us. That's
on international issues, on issues that
exactly,
affect
and that's the distinction we're
both of our
making.
countries.
But,
So
but if we were to bring him in to tell conservatives, "Hey, them liberals are terrible. You better not vote for them," then your point about it being inappropriate applies just as much to him as it would to Hillary Clinton.
see, if Hillary comes up here and talks about international trade, fair game. But to come up here and give a speech, which is nothing more than an electioneering speech on behalf of the Liberal Party of Canada against the opposition Conservatives, that is crossing the line, and I'm shocked that alarm bells are not going off everywhere. Canadians are concerned about foreign interference in their democratic institutions. How could you be concerned about that and not raise the alarm over this invitation that was extended to Hillary Clinton and her accepting it and coming and giving this speech, a partisan liberal speech? It's I want to use more words, but I'm trying to keep it clean.
Good idea. You know, as an old colleague of mine would say, better laugh than cry, right? Because you're not going to get anywhere with either one. But at least laughing, you don't salt your beer. Anyway, I just find this is just another indication of how far left everything in Canada has drifted. You know, when you look at, let's take Pierre Poilievre, there's a guy who posts on my Facebook all the time. He actually compared Pierre Poilievre to Adolf Hitler. Now, I called him out on it. I said that's absolutely outrageous. You would call any Canadian politician, you know, the same as Adolf Hitler. That man was a monster on a scale no one can really comprehend. And to use that kind of language is absolutely, you should know better. He said, well, he keeps us. And I started to press him. I said, so what are the issues that you think he's wrong on? Well, he's going to, you know, he has no substance. All right. He was talking about rental, how Pierre Poilievre has a rental property and he's doing it for profit. And the conservatives are speculators because they want an increase in the volume of housing and the prices of housing to drop. I posted back, so how is this a bad thing? Doesn't that mean he understands the market better than you do and that more supply means lower prices and that's what everybody
Or an
wants?
even better question, Nick, is how is it that how could you be accused of being a housing speculator if you want to take action to drive prices down?
That's a good. I wish I'd have thought of that. But the bottom line was, obviously, Pierre knew more about it than he did. I said, so what else? And he had nothing. He just kept going over these old talking points as if they were actually going to change anybody's mind. Because after a while, and we learned this as conservatives, You can call the other guy the boogeyman all day long, but unless you've got something that's better than what the boogeyman's doing, they're going to go with the boogeyman because it's the devil you know versus the one you don't, right? And they just, it makes me, I'm telling you, it's part of the reason why I've really toned down how much time I spend on Facebook, because it's frustrating for me trying to explain to these people, look, if you've got an issue with a politician, present your case, right? But in this case against Polyev, all you're saying was he's a greedy land speculator. He wants prices lower. You're an idiot. You don't know anything about land prices and what happens when people have more supply of anything, land included, then you have people willing to purchase
Yeah.
it. The price goes down, and that's good for
Well,
everybody.
as my
Don't
as
get
my
it.
friend, no, maybe I better not say who he is. Pointed out, a fairly senior, well-known economist in Canada pointed out to me in a private conversation that that really the people who are against housing prices going down are all of the lefties that have paid off all of their mortgages because they had government salaries for 45 years, and they're living in these rich enclaves, and they don't really care about the cost of housing because they don't have a mortgage, and their mortgages are paid off, and they can afford to pay the higher property taxes, and they're just as happy seeing the value of the property go up. And because it's found money for them, they don't have to lift a finger, but the value of their main asset continues to increase, and when the time comes that they sell, that's cash in their pocket. So, of course, the people who were really into allowing the growth of the increase in property prices, aside from the fact that, what the truth is, that if you have a reasonable mortgage, if you don't over leverage yourself, it's nice to see the value of your property going up. Okay, as long as it's growing faster than inflation,
Yeah, good luck with
then
that.
then you're ultimately you're making a profit on your house. Okay, that's great. I don't have a problem with that. But a lot of the guys that are the first people to stand out there and say, "Oh, we've got to have greater land intensification in the city." Okay, and here you'll appreciate this because you spend a lot of time in Ottawa, so I can tell you. Okay, some of the people who are clamoring for that kind of policy at a municipal level here in Ottawa, a lot of them are the glebe people. And I can
Yep.
tell you this much: they're the first people that are going to say greater housing intensification, but not in my neighborhood.
Yeah, the old NIMBY thing.
Okay, not here, not in my backyard. I don't want a 4-story or a 5-story apartment building going up in my backyard. So do it over there. And when I'm doing it over there, I get the best of both worlds. I get my nice quiet neighborhood, and I get the benefit of my property price going up. The value of my property goes up. This is the
Now I
scam,
know who.
Nick. It's a scam. This is the
Of course it
argument.
is.
Okay, the number one driver of high property prices is poor land management, and the number one problem with land management at the municipal level is the refusal to allow cities to grow, to expand outwards. We continue to bring in large numbers of people. Okay, I'm not against immigration, but we don't plan for them properly. And you have a city like the city of Ottawa. We're sitting around 1 million people now here in the city of Ottawa, and the population is forecasted to increase by 50% in the next 30 or 35 years, or something like that. And you ask yourself, well, where are we going to put all those people? Well, the natural answer to that is you expand the city boundaries, the urban boundaries of the city. But people don't want to do that because they say, well, we don't want urban sprawl. Okay, so what's the alternative? The city's going to grow physically, so it's either going to grow horizontally or it's going to grow vertically. So these people all say, well, we're going to grow vertically. That's what the intensification argument is. But when you do that, you're driving property prices up. And on
Now,
top of that, I don't know a single young family. I don't know a single couple that gets married and has the dream of having a couple of children and raising them in an apartment building.
Yeah, I don't know any of them either. They all want their own place, their own
Well, yeah, that's
backyard.
because this is Canada happens to be one of the few really terribly underpopulated countries in the world.
Yeah, trust me, I found that. Drive across the prairie sometime and tell me that there's no room. I do know who you're talking about, though, as far as your senior economic. Well, we should invite him on the show sometime if he's willing to come. I won't name him.
I'll talk to him.
Yeah, do that, because I really respect what he has to say, and it'll be interesting to hear his perception about the way things are going economically in the country, whether it be in real estate or in finances or whatever his specialty is. Then it will be a really good conversation to have. So reach out to him and see what he says.
I will.
But one of the things that occurred to me was, as we're driving across the country, you'd come in to sit. By the way, Saskatoon is much bigger than I thought it was. It's the same size or bigger than Ottawa.
Saskatoon?
Yes.
What did you do in Saskatoon?
I couldn't believe it.
You had to detour.
Well,
you had to detour up towards the north, towards Edmonton, if you were going to do Saskatoon.
We did. We visited some friends in Brandon and in Bruno. In the Capel Valley area, which is another interesting feature.
Right.
If you ever want to go and check a place out, check out the Capel Valley. What was that other place? The Dennis? Yeah, I know, but what was the name of the town we were in at the bottom of the valley? Fort Capel.
Right.
Okay. Just
Andrew Scheer territory.
What's
Andrew Scheer territory.
Yes. That's right. That's where he's from.
No.
Anyway, the point was,
he's from Ottawa.
Or that's his riding?
He represents that riding, but he's from Ottawa.
Okay. Oh, I knew that. That's right. Okay. I did know that. I'm a little rusty.
Okay.
Anyway, we came down from the northeast into Saskatoon on our way through to Calgary. And we stayed at we usually were getting motels that are dog friendly on the edges of town. So we didn't have to, it was all one level. We could take the dog out. We ended up right downtown in Saskatoon it was a wonderful.
Right downtown. That was on the edge.
That was the edge of town?
Close on the edge.
See.
Holy smokes. There was traffic lights and tons of traffic and people. It looked like Laurier Avenue down
Saskatoon is a real city.
It is. It blew my mind. I thought it was a little cattle town. I'm not putting anything. I don't mean that to be, derogatory, but it's not what I expected.
I stand to be corrected, but I think Saskatoon is larger than Winnipeg. Not Winnipeg, Regina.
Oh, okay.
And if I'd known you were passing through Saskatoon, I would have suggested that you pop in and see our friend Brad Trost, who's in Saskatoon.
Oh man, I'd have done that in a heartbeat. Yeah. Oh, pity. Oh well, maybe next time. I don't know if I can get a 48-foot cabin cruiser up that little creek, though.
I don't think so, Nick.
The Red River's one thing, or is that the Capel? I forget which one it was. We crossed a lot of bodies of water on the way out here.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
it's a big country.
It is massive. So the point I was trying to make is, not only is there plenty of room, because everybody says, well, you're putting all these cities on farmlands. Well, first of all, technology has been increasing agricultural output. There's a top to everything, but you're only going to get so much growth out of a particular plot of land, no matter what you do with it. But that doesn't mean we've hit that peak. And the other side of that coin is, then don't take away our nitrogen-based fertilizer, because we've got, less land to grow more food on. But you could take a town. Let's take Bruno, okay? A nice, quiet little town out in the middle of the prairies. You could triple its size, and no one would even know it's there.
Yeah.
It's a great little place, but there's plenty of room. I won't say it's cheap, but it's not expensive to buy a place there.
Well, the challenge, of course, is in convincing people to move out of the big cities into the smaller communities like that.
Well, we'll do what you did. Do what they did in the 1850s when they were looking for immigrants to come from Europe. You just don't mention frost or cold or snow
I have
and give them free land.
I had friends that lived in Alberta, in just outside of Vegreville, about 20 miles outside of Vegreville on the road to Edmonton.
Yeah.
And they were off the road a little bit, and ran a dairy farm there. And they were from they were originally from Ukraine, and as a matter of fact, as a youngster, we would go out there and work on the farm for the summers, often. And so yeah, I remember the my friend, the mother, whom we called Aunt Mary. She wasn't really our aunt, but we referred to her as Aunt Mary. And she would tell how they came from a rural village in Ukraine, and when they got to Canada, got on the train, and they eventually got off the train in Vegreville. And when they got off the train, the town was so rural. They had no sidewalks. They had no paved roads at that time, and we're talking the 1950s. And she says,
Wow.
all she did. It was worse. That they had no electricity. They had in the town, but not on the farm. So it was they were worse off from a technology point of view than they had been back in the old country.
Back in Ukraine.
War fighting and famine notwithstanding. So that was, I mean, they came to Canada to escape all of that, but at the same time they experienced a significant drop in the their standard of living at first. Of course, it's not that bad now, but yeah, it's a big country. It's a big country.
Oh my good Lord!
I
was saying to Allison,
I talk to my friends in Europe,
saying,
Nick, and they go, "How many hours?" I go, "You know how many days it takes to cross country?" They mean, you mean hours. I go, "No, I mean days." And if I'm taking my time, I could stretch it out to a couple of weeks.
well, we did the trip from Sioux Lookout to here in about 5 days.
Yeah,
and that was, we had planned to be here today, but today's the 7th. We planned to be here today, but we got in on Friday. But oh man, one of the things I said to Allison as we're driving across the country, because every corner of this country has something unique about it. And I said,
it's true.
How this is why one of the reasons I'm a religious man is I look at this country and say only God could pack so much beauty into one country. It's just, you go through the Revelstoke, you go through Rogers Pass, or some of these places, go to Lake Louise, and I'm just talking about in BC and Alberta. Never mind the rest of the country.
Right.
It's just unbelievable. And people, they don't understand what they have. Most of them, I don't think, Canadians, you could spend your whole life exploring Canada and never see it all.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the things that young people should do when they get out of school, and I think this would be a worthwhile government program actually, is some way of encouraging people. Give them a free rail pass. And let them ride the railroad from one coast to the other, and hopefully find a way to get up north, and just get to experience Canada, the different people, the wide range of cultures. It really is an eclectic country, geographically, demographically, etc. And it's unfortunate that Canadians these days just don't really appreciate that.
They think the whole world, or all the whole country revolves around the Golden Horseshoe, and that just is not the case.
Nick, it's that time.
I know. That was 2 hours, our first almost coast to coast broadcast. Well, 2/3 of it anyway, because only about, well, yeah, where you are is about 1,000 miles to Halifax.
Just remember this, okay? That now that you're out on the West Coast, don't ever call me an Easterner. I'm not from the East. I'm a Middler.
Midlander. All right, Midlander. I can't even. I can almost call you a Flatlander. Anyway, with that said, we're going to wrap it up for tonight. Thank you all for participating with us, and I certainly hope that you enjoyed the show and want to pass it on and share it with others. So like and subscribe. Yeah, like and subscribe if you'd like, and post some notes in the comments. In the meantime, we will see you all again next week right here on the Nick and Joe Show. Ubi caritas et amor, Deus ibi est. Good evening, God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace, and may you have a fair wind and a following sea.